Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chatham House. I'm delighted to have a good audience here in the room, and I know we have several hundred members online joining us that way as well. So it's just fantastic to be able to have that combined capacity nowadays that we have to reach out to people beyond this room, as well as for those of you who've taken the trouble to come in and join us here today. Thank you to all of you. I'm Robin Niblett, the director of Chatham House. I think I know most of you here. Don't need to introduce myself too much anymore. It's really my very great pleasure to welcome back, in a way, to Chatham House, Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya. I say back because you did an online event with us in 2020, September 2020, just a month after the rigged elections held in Belarus. And we're really thrilled to be able to have you with us today in person. Sviatlana, thank you for coming to join us. I know it's a very busy time at the moment. And I'm welcoming you also on behalf of my colleagues here at Chatham House, led by James Nixie, but also by Riho Astapenia, who is not here, but runs the Belarus Forum at Chatham House, but is outside the country currently. And Katya, great to have you back with us as well. Katya was a Robert Bosch Fellow at Chatham House, and we think about 10 years ago is now a non-resident fellow at the Centre for European Policy Analysis, CIPA. She's been an OSCE election observer. She's worked for the European Endowment for Democracy in Minsk, and is also a Belarusian. So we thought it'd be great to be able to get some extra angles from Katya here after we've heard from Sviatlana. I don't really need to introduce Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya much, I don't think, to people here. You've made such an impression, I think, internationally since you stepped in to run for the presidency of Belarus back in 2020, stepped in after your husband, Sergei, was arrested in May, at the end of May. Elections were held in early August. And then you had to flee the country not long after the heavy political repression, and were pushed, in essence, into exile, as far as I can see, from which you have continued your leadership of the Belarusian democratic movement, and really keeping up that energy, that power for change in Belarus, which is receiving huge support around the world, but in particular in Europe and the United States. And part of what we want to discuss today, how do we keep that movement going, and how can others be supportive for positive change? Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya has been the winner of the Sakharov Prize. I attended a lunch hosted in her honor at the Munich Security Conference, where she was presented as the winner of the Charlemagne Prize as well this year. And I think this is a sign, if I may say so, of the great support for positive change that people see in you and want to be able to realize, if we can, through you going forward. So I'm going to offer the opportunity for Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya to say a couple of words to kick us off. Just to remind everyone here, this meeting is on the record, perhaps obviously, but not always the case when you're visiting Chatham House. We will then take questions. For those of you joining us online, please go to the Q&A function. Do not use chat, do not use raise hand, they won't work. But please put your questions whenever you want into the Q&A, and I'll get as many as I can. For those of you here in the room, when we come to Q&A, please just raise your hands, and a microphone will come to you. You do not need to stand up. We will take your questions that way. So with that introduction, Sviatlana, let me hear a couple of comments from you. Please welcome to Chatham House.
Good afternoon to everyone. I'm really grateful for inviting me to speak here today, and also big thanks for the important work that the Chatham House, Belarus, and its leader, Ryho Astapenia, have done to monitor the situation in my country. Please accept the words of appreciation to your work. You bring facts to the table and help to dispel the myths and misinformation. So, dear friends of Belarus, yesterday evening I met the cast of the Belarusian Free Theatre and several Ukrainian artists when they were rehearsing a play by a Belarusian author, Algerd Bakharevich, in the Barbican Conservatory. It was wonderful to hear that Belarusians and Ukrainians each speak in their own language and perfectly understand each other. Some of the cast members have already lost their loved ones in the ongoing war. A lot of their relatives had to flee. And of course, none of them will never forget February 24, because on February 24, exactly 2 weeks ago, my country and the whole world entered a new reality. Russia started an invasion of Ukraine using Belarus as a launching pad. In this new reality, a maternity hospital in Zhytomyr was bombed by planes based in Belarus. Our country is de facto under military occupation. The regime is selling Belarusian sovereignty at this very moment. This new reality transformed our struggle from the fight for democracy to the fight for Belarusian sovereignty. And on February 26th, despite of 18 months of devastating repressions, tens of thousands took to the streets to protest the war. And we know that more than 800 people were detained. But this was the largest protest since 2020. And now almost every day something is happening in Belarus. Small rallies, acts of sabotage. On February 27th, cyber partisans blocked Russian transports by hacking railway systems. Yesterday, several activists were accused of destroying Russian military equipment. So Belarusians are not just watching. They also fight against occupants, both on Belarus and Ukraine's territory. Belarus battalion, named after Kostuś Kalinowski, was formed to defend Kiev, and one of our compatriots lost his leg in Bucha. Another young man was killed. Our medics work there as well, and this week we agreed with Annalena Baerbock that Germany will provide Belarusian medics with a field hospital. Belarusians in the country are united in support of Belarusian independence and opposition to the war. Even before everything started, only 11% of Belarusians agreed that our soldiers should be sent to Ukraine to support Russia, according to the polls of Chatham House. Even Lukashenko's supporters now are against the war. We are hearing reports of discontent among the nomenclatura and the army. People understand they don't want Belarus to become a pariah like Russia. In general, the moods in society are changing. As you know, before the war, the pro-Russian moods were predominant. These days, Belarusians are watching what Russia is doing to Ukraine, and they are for themselves. Perhaps this is the reason why Belarusian regular troops refuse to cross the Belarusian-Ukrainian border. Notice that Belarusians are fleeing to Europe, not to Russia. Europe means safety for them, and Russia means war. And we see the spark of pro-European moods among Belarusians, and of course it inspires me a lot. But the main lesson all of us should learn that dictators cannot be re-educated, and definitely dictators cannot be appeased. The tyrann Lukashenko enjoys his personal impunity, and believe me, he will try to fool you again and pretend to be a peacemaker or peacekeeper in this situation. But I believe that it's time for democracy to show its teeth. And it's crucial to put diplomatic, economic, and political pressure on Belarus regime. Lukashenko shares full responsibility for this attack on Ukraine. And I urge for official derecognition of Lukashenko's regime through cessation of diplomatic contacts and public statement of derecognition. Suspend him from Interpol and all international organizations. On the other hand, we ask democratic movement to ask democratic governments to recognize democratic Belarus and support those who are fighting for freedom and independence. I advocate that sanctions on Putin regimes to be applied on Lukashenko's clique as well. Belarusian state banks should be disconnected from the SWIFT network, and imports from state enterprises should be banned. For one, so that Russian companies and banks don't use Belarus as a huge loophole. It's already happening, and believe me, half measures don't work. They only make things worse. And finally, it is paramount to support Belarusian civil society, working from Minsk, Warsaw, Kiev, Vilnius, wherever. Belarusian civil society now help Ukraine. Human rights defenders like Vesna, activists, solidarity funds like By Soul and Country to Live In, the biggest Telegram channels like Nechta and media like Belsat are constantly working to debunk Russian fakes, helping the refugees and assisting Belarusian soldiers who don't want to take part in this war. I also ask you to support initiatives popularizing Belarus culture, language, and history, everything that strengthens Belarusian national identity. So I really believe that it's time for us to show what democracy is capable of. Today, all the world must stand with Ukraine and Belarus. There will be no free Belarus without free Ukraine. And I really believe that Ukraine will win and that we will join them as free and democratic nation. And this is our dream. Belarusians are ready for democracy and they want freedom and independence. Please keep up your important work to make their voice heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those strong words, Sviatlana, and also for being very specific, I think, towards the end in what you're looking for from Western leaders and governments in Europe, governments in the US and elsewhere around the world in terms of support. Let me just, if I can, follow up with a couple of quick questions to you, and then I'll bring Katya in as well. You mentioned that you've been meeting with Belarus people here in London, and I think with other citizens around Europe and outside. How big is this diaspora, this group of people outside? How important are they, do you think, to the movement? How can you leverage them? How are they helping? And how can we interact to that extent with them in that process?
You know, since summer 2020, we saw that Belarusian diaspora exists, that they are with Belarusians. Because in the past, like, Belarusians lived separately. You know, that in no one country, there were no Belarusian, like, united diaspora. People lived separately, you know, but the events in Belarus united all Belarusians abroad. And since summer 2020, they started to organize movements. They started to organize rallies. They organized elections in the country of they live in. They organized counting, independent counting of voters. And since then, after crackdown, after our uprising, they became even more active. And now in almost every country, there is organization of Belarusian people who are working with governments, who are working with ministries, with the parliaments, you know, to promote Belarusian issue. And they help, you know, it's difficult to underestimate, because without the rallies, without the constant letters to governments, it would be much more difficult to seize attention of different countries. So they are our voices. They are Belarusian voices in their countries, and people who flee Belarus because of repressions, they can find support in Germany, in Poland, you know, in Slovenia, Slovakia, Czech Republic, everywhere, because we know that there are people who will help everybody, who will help to find job, who will help to send a child to kindergarten. You know, it's also very important. And we have so-called people's embassies in many countries who just fulfill obligation of regimes, ambassadors, and communicating with ministers of foreign affairs. They are our voices, and I'm so grateful to every people who didn't give up till now, because all the people have their own life, and they are they are doing their job and coming to diaspora and doing extra job, and I'm grateful for their strength.
Just a follow-up question on that specifically. One of the things being noticeable in Russia is the extent to which any vestige or any aspect of independent media has been shut down now. Social media is becoming more and more controlled in Russia. The capacity for information to get in is so difficult. Could you say something about the situation in Belarus? Has the Lukashenko regime managed to control, shut down media in a similar way? Is it possible for you to get the messages from outside in to the country? Can you just say something about that context today?
What is Russian media are going through now? We have gone through this for this year and a half. And I suppose that Lukashenko gave example to Kremlin how alternative media could be shut down, because all the alternative media have been destroyed in Belarus, but they managed to restore their work in different countries. And thanks to support of international community of assistance from different countries, they are managing to work somehow. Of course, there is a lack of journalists on the ground, but now every person in Belarus is somehow became journalist. And of course, most of viewers now on YouTube, on Instagram, Telegram channels. So people are very creative. They found how to get out of these restrictions. People in Belarus use VPN to avoid all the restrictions in Belarus, and people know how to find information. And what regimes already did is that it declared almost all the alternative media as extremists. And if you, for example, watching something and somebody sees this, so you could be detained for following some channels. But life is teaching us, and people delete the history. They somehow managing to be, to follow alternative media and to keep their safety. And now the same is happening in Russia, and of course, all those alternative media have to be restored in different countries. I think they're doing this already. It's almost impossible to forbid YouTube. People will know how to reach real information. It's
important to remember the point you just made there, the extent to which, in a way, Russia especially the last month or plus, has actually repressed further, and where Belarus was before, which was even more repressive. It's an important reminder you did there. One more question, then I want to bring Katya in. Could you say a bit more about the issue of recognition? Because I've asked colleagues around here, and I think there's a lack of clarity, I think, amongst the analytical community, as well as perhaps Chatham House members. Where are we, where are you, on what you would like to see in terms of recognition, not recognition? The European Parliament has stepped up, and I think, in essence, at least passed a motion to recognize the democratic movement as the legitimate government of Ukraine. I think maybe the Lithuanian government has done something similar, but there's a little bit of a lack of clarity over what has happened and what you are looking to make happen as a response in that space. What could you share with us on your approach to recognition? Does it help? Does it not? Should people, is it a Venezuela option? I mean, could you just tell us what your approach is on
that? Now we see that before, because of becoming an accomplice of Russia, and because Russia is hopefully losing this war, Lukashenko feels very weak now, and we have to regime feels very insecure and fragile, and Lukashenko can't be guarantor of our sovereignty anymore. And only after the war have started, we decided to create a cabinet where representatives from Belarus and people from exile will be a new center of power, because Lukashenko can't fulfill his duties about independence anymore. He is illegal and illegitimate for a year and a half already, and he is not recognized as ruler among Belarusians. He is not recognized as president among democratic countries. But still, we hear some signals that people are communicating with him. Emmanuel Macron called him, once Angela Merkel called him. And we have to deprive him of all legitimacy. No ambassadors should be sent to Belarus. No ambassadors should be accepted, in different countries. I mean, Belarusian ambassadors. Just to give him this clear understanding that you don't represent Belarusian people. You are no guarantor of your sovereignty. You are selling your country to, military occupation. So you are selling your country to Kremlin at the moment. But there is another center of power. We are already working with the ambassadors from different countries. Right. We are already accepted on the highest level in European countries, in the USA. So we are recognized but this is not formalized. Yeah. We need to give this, European countries, democratic countries have to send clear message to nomenclatura, to the army, to military officers that, look, there is center of power, we recognize it as alternative for you. Exactly. You can join them, and they are new Belarus, not Lukashenko, who is weak now.
So it's really about making this emphasis on not recognizing him is probably the most important first step you're doing. And I must say I was really struck by your opening remark, something along the lines of, that Lukashenko had lost the right. It's not just a fight over democracy, but it's now become a fight over sovereignty. And that since that use of Belarusian territory for this purpose, the nature of the struggle, if you want to call it that, has changed. Katya, let me bring you in, because I think this is a very important bridge. From my limited knowledge of Belarus, part of what Lukashenko had going for him is that he'd sort of kept a form of sovereignty. And now that has been fiction, has been turned into a fiction and revealed as a fiction. To what extent do you think that there is room for the nomenclatura, those perhaps in positions of power in business, in the military, in the security services, for that group to lose their support, or to be wedged, or to be changed somehow in terms of how they interact with the government? Do you see this as an opportunity, or is it going to become harder?
Yes, well, thank you very much for this question, Robin. I think there is definitely an opportunity. I can't agree more with Sviatlana that the war in Ukraine, the Russian war in Ukraine, has galvanized public opinion within Belarus. We know the figures from Chatham House poll that was conducted before the war started, that 60% of Belarusian public thought that Belarus' involvement in this war would be a catastrophe. And I'm sure that now the numbers have gone up, because not less because for Belarusians, I think war is something that touched nearly every family. The memory of World War II is very, very high in Belarus. It was erased as a country. Many people were evacuated. Many people had to flee the country. So therefore, now I think, and what Sviatlana mentioned, when there was this protest on the 27th of February, when people came out despite 18 months of very high level of repression, it really showed how anti-war the public opinion in Belarus is. If we look at the nomenclature, if we look at the elites, it seems to me that Lukashenko's dragging Belarus into the war has also demoralized them. We saw very similar pictures to the ones we saw, in fact, in Russia when Putin was talking to his Security Council. We saw very grim faces of Belarusian officials learning about the war when Lukashenko was showing them the map. when Lukashenko a few days ago, for example, had to sign in the results of the referendum, he apologized. He kept saying that you should believe me, trust me, please. We are not participating, our troops are not participating in the war. We are not an aggressor state. So there is a clear message, seems to me, coming through from the nomenclatura and from the elites that the government, the regime, including the security services, I think they've been absolutely demoralized. So the question is, how do we use this opinion? How do we use this momentum to bring about change? Lukashenko lost legitimacy after the 2020 presidential election. His rating remains around 25%, and I think probably after the start of the war and Belarus involvement in it, it has very likely gone down. And I think very interesting will be to see how Lukashenko will be able to maneuver, if at all. I think the economy will be now a key issue. Obviously, we have seen already the effect of the Western sanctions, particularly more sectoral sanctions in the last few weeks, when Belarusian potash was, for example, banned from being shipped abroad. And now more sanctions coming on Belarus because of Belarus' participation in the war. I think Lukashenko is really trapped. He had relied on Putin. We know again today it was announced that Lukashenko is going tomorrow to see Putin again. So he no doubt he will be asking for more money. But again, the last time Lukashenko went to see Putin a few weeks ago, and he wanted to receive a 3.9 billion loan, he did not receive it. And now with the sanctions on Russia and with the Russian international foreign currency reserves being frozen, it's very unlikely that Putin will provide more financial assistance to Lukashenko. So on the one hand, that would leave us to think that maybe there is momentum to push Lukashenko to change his view, to change his policy. But in my view, I think he will be getting closer and closer to Putin, although that will not be supported, I think, within the elites, within the nomenclatura. And I think the key is really for the democratic opposition movement, for Sviatlana, who is viewed as a moral compass and for the first time as a real opposition force, which Belarus had not had for, since Lukashenko came to power back in 1994. For the opposition, democratic opposition movement to bring in the message inside the country. And the question is, how do you reach people there? How do you galvanize them into action? Like when there was this organized appeal from Sviatlana on the 27th of February and people took out to the street, I think that was a very good example that needs to be augmented and followed. But obviously the question is, how do you reach to the elites as well? And even though they don't support Lukashenko, they still are very fearful, especially having Russian forces, armed forces in Belarus now. I think any attempt at palace coup is unlikely because the elites will be very scared of Putin and Russia's potential action.
Sviatlana, and I'm going to come and take some questions from the floor and then a few from online. But Sviatlana, could you say a word or two more about sanctions as well, and how they need to be calibrated so they don't actually drive Lukashenko and potentially then Belarus even closer to Russia, kind of stuck in as we've often seen, sanctions don't often work in changing things. They can punish, but they're not necessarily great for change. Are you concerned that the drive for sanctions might actually entrench Lukashenko and push him closer to Vladimir Putin?
So look, I think they are already as close as possible, and when after our uprising, when I started to meet with the leadership of European Union countries, I explained to them that on dictatorship, only economic pressure is working, and diplomacy doesn't work. And we, since the beginning, asked for tough sectoral sanctions on the regime. It's a pity that it took only 10 months, to make decisions. Only after hijacking of Ryanair flight, first sectoral sanctions have been imposed with huge loopholes, but nevertheless. And for example, this migration attack on Poland and Lithuania didn't cost Lukashenko anything at all. And he feels impunity and he thinks he can do everything he can because democracy is weak. Democracy can't show its teeth. And I still believe that sanctions is the most powerful instrument that democracy have. And now, when such a huge response was given to the aggression of Russia by democratic countries, the same response should be given to Lukashenko's regime as well, because he's already, Kremlin is already using Belarusian enterprises as a loophole for continuing trading. For example, Russian Sviatlana is already selling steel through Belarusian enterprises. If Belarusian state banks will not be switched off from SWIFT, it will be opportunity for Kremlin to trade, to continue economic relationship. So Lukashenko has to share the responsibility because because of him, our country became enemy to Ukrainians, and we still have to explain the situation for the people who were not involved into Belarusian fight, that we people and regime are two different things. Belarusian students already like abused in some universities. Belarusian people, are not let into some restaurants. We have such cases of this changing of attitude to people. And it's very important now not to hide that you are Belarusian, but to explain people that we are not on the side of a regime, that we are fighting, that we are supporting Ukrainians. We are doing all possible in order to support people in Ukraine. And but coming back to sanctions, sanctions do work when they are joint, when they are tough, and they are, одномоментные of this. Okay, simultaneous, yeah, because first sanctions in Belarus were imposed, some individual sanctions. I don't consider them to be sanctions, but still 5 months, next 10 months. So regimes know how to use this time, to circumvent sanctions, to look for new forms of avoiding them. We are dealing with the experienced regimes.
Thank you very much. Right, let me open up here and take some questions. We've got lots there. Take a question there first, and then the lady in front. So maybe these two here. Come down this side after. Yeah.
Sure. Thomas Cole, freelance journalist. Are you concerned that Belarus could ultimately be completely absorbed into the Russian Federation and no longer exist as an independent state?
Okay, just hold that thought. Are you worried that Belarus could be absorbed? Could you do the lady just in front there as well? I'll come to you. Yeah.
Thank you. Anna Matveeva, King's College London. Can you please tell us a bit more about the Belarusian democratic movement, how it's organized, how united it is, and if you maybe like to comment on the case of Roman Protasevich? Thank you.
So maybe a couple of questions on those issues. How concerned are you about Belarus being absorbed? Yeah, and then a question about organization and the democratic opposition.
Everything has changed when the war started, and now we understand that the fate of Belarus is depends on the fate of Ukraine. Because if, I don't believe in this, but if Ukraine fails, there will be no more free Belarus, because Lukashenko will feel his power again because he was supporting Putin, and of course we will be able to lose our sovereignty, independence. Maybe formally Lukashenko will be keeping his power, but actually we will be about absolute under absolute control of Russia. That's why we put all our efforts to support Ukrainians, to help them to somehow how we can, because on the outcome of this war, depends how long my children will not see their daddy, how long Maria Kolesnikova and other people will stay in jail. Because with the victory of Ukraine, Lukashenko will lose all the legitimacy, even in the eyes of his cronies.
Yeah. Do you want to say something on that first at all, on this issue of the risk of absorption? There's the economic side as well. I mean, the more you push the two sides together, the more, they might say, well, let's use the ruble and get rid of the currency and sort of create a de facto union.
Yes, yeah, no, I agree with Sviatlana that if Putin wins, he will be emboldened, he may go further. I think it's unlikely to absorb Belarus formally because in a way, the Lukashenko regime is already a puppet regime, and it does what Putin tells him. Lukashenko does what Putin tells him to do. In a way, there is no need to actually annex it formally, but of course, this danger is, and it will be higher in case Putin wins, and that here Belarus will be just one of those other countries like Moldova and potentially South Caucasus. And I also think that, of course, if Ukraine wins, it will be very good, big momentum for Belarus. And again, this is something that Belarus could galvanize on and potentially get rid of Lukashenko.
Another reason why they won't want to lose.
Maybe I will add a little bit more about this. Of course, I understand that the things will be much, much worse for us and for Ukrainians if Russia wins. But maybe sometimes we forget that country is not about president, it's not about army, but it's about people. I'm sure that even if something goes wrong in Ukraine, Ukrainian people will not give up. It will be the region of constant conflict. The same about Belarus. Despite of repressions, despite of tortures in our country, people step by step, showing the regime that we are here, we are not giving up, we are still resistant to you. Yes, you have army, you have a military force, but we are people of this country and we are not going to lose our sovereignty. So it will not be like, okay, we lost, please, Kremlin, we are here for you. No, people will still continue the resistance
And on the organization, on that second question, how organized you can be right now inside the country and beyond it, and the connections between the two. Obviously, you may not want to say everything about how you're organized, but whatever you could share with us on that.
First of all, I have to say that I'm really proud that for a year and a half, democratic forces are united as never before. And despite of all the attempts of the regime to quarrel us, to split us, we managed to overcome everything. So we are not just vertical, we are mostly horizontal formation, organization. We have a lot of different initiatives, a lot of small and big organizations that are doing their job. And it doesn't mean that I'm, as the leader, tell them what they have to do. We are communicating, we are coordinating our actions, but we have a strategy to create multiple points of pressure on the regime on the one hand, on the other hand, to help Belarusian people, to help political prisoners, to help people in exile. And everybody is doing what he or she can, what the organization can do. The same in Belarus. One people are brave enough to go and to make some kind of provocation on the railway, not to let military tanks, to go on the territory of Ukraine. Some people are ready only to send letters to political prisoners. Some are also brave enough to widespread self-made newspapers. Some can write, I'm against war and go to the main streets of Minsk and so on. So it's everybody's contribution into this fight. And I'm trying a lot, every day to communicate with people in Belarus, to communicate with all this organization, to understand what's going on, but not to influence the decisions they work. My global task is to find assistance to all these organizations. I'm communicating with European Union with countries, to launch more support, more practical help to media, to human rights defenders centers, and so on. But then it's their job, right. They continue. And as for Roman Protasevich, he is a hostage, and regime is using him now. He started to say something about Belarus, that I'm on the side of Lukashenko already, all these things, and people don't pay attention to what he is saying, because nobody knows in what conditions he is now. So we accept him the same as political prisoner, as hostage of the regime. They want to use him, but people know the obstacles.
Thank you very much. A question here. I'm going to go over there. Yeah, Charles.
Thank you. Charles Grant from the Centre for European Reform. In Ukraine, if the Russians succeed in taking large chunks of territory, there will be a guerrilla movement of opposition, one imagines. That's highly likely, of violent resistance. In Belarus, the opposition has avoided violence. It's used non-violent methods. Might there come a point where you think the opposition has to resort to violence? And if so, in what circumstances? And what would your view be on that?
Use of violence. And please, Orisa.
Добрый день, Sviatlana. Orisa Lutsevich, I'm the head of Ukraine Forum. Really pleased to see you. I think it's very important that we all hear what Sviatlana says, that we have to make sure Belarusian boys don't cross the border in Ukraine. Belarusian territory was already used to launch over 70 ballistic missiles, including in civilian infrastructure. I really hope you can mobilize all the courage there is among the people in Belarus to mount that anti-war protest. It's key. And also, I think what you are calling for, applying sanctions similar to Belarus for Russia, for dragging into Belarus, and I hope you all hear. And now the question, because I know when you started your democratic resistance, you were very cautious to speak against Russia for obvious reasons. Now, Prime Minister Johnson said Russia must fail, Putin must fail, Putinism must fail. What do you say should be the strategy for Putinism to fail? Because he doesn't give anybody, neither Belarus nor Ukraine, a peaceful future. How would you suggest we do it?
Do you want to take those two questions? And actually that one you just asked there matches one online here from Vera Horton. Again, whether the indication of Vera's question is that you're being cautious about what you say about Putin. And I think there's a similar question coming there. So those two for you.
I'm now sometimes blamed that at the beginning, we had a peaceful revolution. At the beginning, Belarusians were admired for peaceful revolution, that we didn't want any violence. And now we accuse that, look, you didn't get rid of the regime, maybe because of you were too peaceful. But I believe in law. I believe that unity, strong decisions can help us, to get rid of the regime. And people in Belarus didn't have experience of uprising and violent uprising. And now, of course, looking what's going on in Ukraine, we understand that context is different, situation is different. Their government and people are on the one side. We are here on two different sides. I still believe that Belarusian people don't have to take guns in their hands, and moreover, we don't have these guns. But I believe, I think that now those people who can act braver, who can do something else than flowers and balloons, as said in Belarus, they can do this, and they will not be punished for this in free democratic Belarus. So we give more opportunities to not give, just we not allow, we don't condemn those people who are ready to do something. Who knows what will be in the future? We can't predict, but we are trying through media, communicate with our soldiers. with our officers, with nomenclatura. We don't want to be similar to regime. We don't want blood on our hands, and we don't want to be as low as they are. But time change. Times changes. Времена меняются. Times change, yeah. And as for being cautious, once in one of my interviews at the beginning of our revolution, once I told wise Putin, because at that moment, I thought that maybe Russia will see our uprising, that the most of the countries against Lukashenko, and at that moment they were hesitating, to support or not support. They gave Lukashenko money, but they answer to our revolution wasn't very clear. But now, of course, everything has changed, and my rhetoric for a couple of months already was changing towards Kremlin. And now I see that Putin is responsible for the war in Ukraine, and he dragged our country into this war. But again, yesterday when I met with Britain diaspora, I was asked the question, is Putin and Russia our enemies? And knowing the situation in Belarus, when some people say Belarus is aggressor or Belarus is enemy, I can't agree with this, because Belarusian people and regime, two different things. And it's the same about Russia. We know that a lot of people in Russia don't want this war. They have relatives in Ukraine. Their hearts are bleeding because of this situation. So we have to separate in Russia as well, Kremlin and Russian people. So Russia is not enemy. Regime, dictator is our common enemy in this situation.
Thank you very much. I do want to just bring a couple of people, if I can, online, because I've got so many hands up in the room, but we've also got equal number of questions, many dozens here. So could I see if we can open up a question from Camilla Follett? Camilla, are you there? Because I didn't have the screen in front of me. Or can we do them live?
Thank you very much. Yes, this is Camilla.
We can hear you. Yes, please go ahead.
I'm a student at UCLC. I wanted to ask, how can we successfully enter a dialogue with the Belarusian civilians who are not already part of the democratic movement, especially with the worsening crackdown on the media? Thank you.
So that question, just because, Camilla, we couldn't hear it perfectly and that's been deleted off my screen, but never mind, was, I think, along the lines of what is happening about defections. Yes, was that? No, Camilla Follett was a different question. In any case, did you hear the question? Did anyone hear the question? Thank you. How can you get people not involved in the democratic? Exactly. How can we get people not involved in the democratic movement involved in the democratic movement, given how separated they are? Do you want to take that very specific question first? That broader population that maybe have been bought in, especially with the crackdown on the media. I now remember the end of the question. Thank you very much. Please, maybe Sviatlana first, and then.
For 27 years, Belarusian people were mostly apolitical, and new generation grew up. New generation of people who see how our country can develop if not poor government, of mismanaging. And more and more, I think that there were many reasons why people uprised in 2020. But at that moment, it was shock for Lukashenko. He always knew that there is a group of opposition, but at that moment, 70–80% of people were against him. And he was so scared of this fact. And that's why he defeated our president so cruelly, cruelly. And those people who were not involved in politics, they again returned into their kitchens to discuss politics, returned into their families. Okay, it's too difficult to be in politics. I don't want to be there. And now, for this year and a half, we were fighting for this middle group of population. We explained them how our country is working, where the taxes go, everything about law. It was mostly about education, because people, they don't want to understand how everything is working, and the people are undereducated, especially, older generation. And our task was to explain, not to say them that you will live wonderful after we came to power. There was no populism in our policy, but we wanted to. We wanted people to know more about our country. And now, of course, anti-war movement absorbed much more people than we could absorb in our pro-democratic movement, because democracy is so difficult. What is parliament, how it works, should I be responsible for the future of my country? People sometimes are lazy, honestly speaking, but war is so clear. Deaths are so understandable. This maternity hospital bombing was so shocking for Belarusian people, and now people are more and more involved in anti-war movement.
Do they know it's happened in Belarus? Do they know that attack on Mariupol?
We are trying to do our best through alternative media to explain. It's a pity. I say that a lot of people don't know the reality. Some people believe in state propaganda. Some people live too far away, to be interested in other countries. But again, we are using media. We are using self-made newspapers, different channels. We are using, we are asking our people, communicate to your neighbors, communicate to your partners. People are quarreling in the same families about the situation. Persuade, give the facts.
Exactly. Katya, quickly on this, then I'm going to bring in a couple of questions we've been waiting for a long time. So, please, Katya first.
Yes, well, I would like to underline here that the public opinion hasn't changed on Lukashenko. He still has 20-25%. The question is how do you make these people more active? And I think there are three main points. The first one is vision, that the democratic opposition that, again, Belarus has had for the first time in its all nearly 30 years history of independence. It has to create very clear emotional vision, future-looking vision, exciting vision. Lukashenko is not capable of providing it, and there is no way, therefore, he will regain public opinion. But the vision should also be emotional. Yes, it should be anti-war, it should be about democracy, and it should be perhaps about market economy. And once people realize that the democratic opposition does offer an alternative that might work in Belarus, then I think these people from the middle ground will see some opportunity for them. The second point is campaign. Sviatlana and her team has been doing fantastic work trying to reach out people inside Belarus, but it's very difficult. It's not like in normal country you can go door to door and you can knock and talk to people. It's not possible. No one would dare to do that today in Belarus. So we are really left to social media. I think social media can be explored perhaps a bit more. You can use maybe paid advertising on various social media so that people will see specific stories, perhaps. Storytelling is very popular about how democratic movement is different from what Lukashenko is offering. And the third point is establishing context within the elites, with the regime, which is, again, very, very hard because the regime in Belarus has been very vertical, very streamlined. You don't get various kind of branches of power, of thought. It really all boils down to Lukashenko and his son who controls security services. But the team in Warsaw, the BIPOL team, they're working very actively on that. These are the former security services who are people from the security services who defected, and they are working to establish this context. But it is a very long-term process, and it takes time, as Sviatlana said. Therefore, I mean, I think the opposition is working in that direction, but it will take time.
I'm going to squeeze in a last little group of questions, if you're all right, with all the questions you're taking. Two at the front row, and you've been waiting a very, very long time. please, yeah. Whichever order.
Sure. James Nixie, Chatham House. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you to both panelists really for a very insightful and inspirational 60 minutes. And it's about inspiration I wanted to ask you, Sviatlana. You mentioned it in your opening remarks. And specifically about your adopted homeland of Lithuania. Lithuania has taken you in and so many of your countrywomen and men, and it stood up to Russia before the war, it stood up to China. So I suppose what I want to ask is, what is it about the Lithuanians, the Lithuanian government, if you like, maybe the people, that maybe we can learn from? What can they? How can we learn from them to tackle the Russia challenge?
Okay. Keep that thought. Yep.
Sean Curtin, Chatham House member. I'd like to ask both Sviatlana and Katya, what happens if the war goes very badly for Putin or he loses? What will be the effect on Belarus, but also on those other puppet states such as Abkhazia, North Ossetia, and the Transnistria Republic? Because if the army isn't almighty and all dominating, then is there anything to fear? Will there not be more people in Georgia trying to regain territory, and also in Moldova? Thank you.
Okay, and yeah, question right there in the middle. Sorry. What do I see there?
Yeah, thank you very much. Ewan Grant, Chatham House member. I've got a copy of Tom Clancy's Commander-in-Chief on my Kindle, and I know how prescient that is and how much of it is set on the Lithuanian-Belarus border. My question is about winning the information war. What messages should the classmates and teachers of all the expensive private schools in the West be saying to the sons and daughters of regime insiders in Minsk and indeed in Moscow?
So what are the key messages we should be giving to the nomenclatura, as opposed to the next generation? What might work for them specifically, I think was that last question. Yeah, because it's for the elite insiders was the question. And the second one was, if the war goes badly, what might be the spillover effects? I don't know if you're in a position to talk about that or not. Obviously, the first one was about Lithuania and what we can learn from that. So
for sure, I will
we're a few minutes over, so I'll let you use your time as quickly as you want.
Yeah, for sure, I will take the question about Lithuania, because what I understood from the situation in Belarus, that small countries can be as brave as powerful countries sometimes cannot be. And I'm so proud that Lithuania became my second home at the moment. I feel full support for myself, for Belarusian people in this wonderful country. Poland, Latvia, Estonia, Czech Republic also very welcoming, and Poland, of course, especially, but Lithuania is so brave. Lithuania at the beginning, not at the beginning, after European Union sanctions left so many loopholes in their sanction policy, they wanted to close the loopholes by stopping transition of potash through their territory. I understand national interests were touched, but they decided to do this for us. And I want other countries to watch small, brave Lithuania and study from this premise.
And I'm going to let you take, do you want to say anything about the spillover, or maybe Katya, do you want to take that question about spillover very quickly?
Yes, yeah, I do think that if Putin loses, then it will be a good trigger point for Belarus. I do think that would be, for Lukashenko, it would be very difficult to maneuver. And I think there will be some momentum within the elites that they might think that he is not the guy that we have to support. And maybe the time to jump off his ship is actually coming. And should be used. So I do think that Lukashenko will also go eventually. I'm not an expert on Moldova or on Georgia, but it seems to me that, Transnistria, already, I think a few days ago, there was information that they wanted, again, to ask for independence, to secede. Maybe in Georgia, the government will try to retake the territories. I don't know. It's hard for me to comment on that.
So last comment from you. What message what messages do you think we need to be sent to the elites in a way, and the sons and daughters of those elites in Belarus and Russia that would make the difference? What would they hear?
There could be two different messages. People who believe in dictatorship, believe in regimes and so on, they could say, study well, because in future you will have to go to another country because there is no future in Belarus anymore. And the other message is that you are responsible for the future of your country. Please don't look at me as a part of nomenclatura. You are starting to make this country better. And please do your best now in order to not repeat the mistakes that we are doing now.
Thank you very much. Look, let me first of all, before we say thank you, apologize to all of you in the room who had your hands up from the beginning. I took as many as I could, and apologies especially to all of you online, because I took one in the end directly, though a few of your questions were answered, as you will have known, from the ones here in the room. So fine, Katya, thank you very much for your insights, but Sviatlana, we're really, really obviously thrilled to have you here, back with Chatham House. It is one of those historic moments where I think one has to decide where you stand. We're an analytical organization, we analyze a lot, but when you see things be as wrong as they are, you have to decide where you stand and stand for it. I think Chatham House stands with you and with the people of Belarus. Thank you very much indeed.